The forest stood ancient, its silence woven from centuries of forgotten prayers and brittle leaves. Early fog drifted between skeletal pines, erasing distance, blurring horizon and memory alike. It was said that the trail ahead, an unmarked artery of dirt and decay, swallowed more than just footsteps. The hikers came every few years, drawn by the thrill of remoteness, only for their stories to dissolve into rumor. What remained were fragments, tents found zipped from the inside, campfires still warm, and journals that ended mid-sentence. Local rangers whispered that the woods were alive, not in the way roots breathe or moss feeds, but with an awareness older than maps. As the first crunch of gravel echoed beneath boot soles, a sensation crept through the air, an unspoken invitation, or perhaps a warning, that the forest was ready to remember. The deeper they ventured, the more the forest forgot the concept of sound. Birds vanished first, then insects. Even the crunch beneath their boots began to feel muted, as if the soil itself absorbed noise like a sponge. The trail wound between massive trees whose roots coiled over boulders like constricting veins, their bark scarred with runes no ranger had documented. A faint hum, perhaps wind, seemed to come from the ground. The lead hiker paused, scanning the terrain. Every direction mirrored another, each tree a twin to the next, the world caught in a looping symmetry. A distant cry, human yet hollow, echoed once, then folded back into silence. They marked their position on a GPS that suddenly blinked to 0 coordinates. The forest, it seemed, no longer existed on any map. At dusk, they found the first relic. A tattered piece of clothing caught high in a branch, fluttering like a signal from the lost. The forest dimmed unnaturally fast, its horizon devouring light in greedy increments. A fire was built, its glow revealing faces drawn tight with unease. Whispers arose about the stories, of voices heard calling names that rent one's own, of shapes glimpsed just beyond torchlight. When one of them laughed nervously, the sound felt foreign, bouncing between trees as if mocked. From beyond the ring of flame, a faint clicking began, rhythmic, deliberate, like pebbles striking wood. They scanned the darkness, flashlights quivering over trees, but every beam returned only drifting fog and hollow trunks. The clicking stopped, then something exhaled behind them. The morning brought no sun, only a bruised sky and ash where the fire had been. The forest seemed closer, tighter, the air thick enough to drink. Their map had warped overnight, waterlogged, the ink dissolving trails into veins. They followed what they believed was the same path, but each turn led them deeper. Trees bending inward like watchful sentinels. The clicking returned, softer this time, from above. They craned their necks and through the canopy glimpsed something hanging. Cloth? Bone? It swayed gently, spinning as if suspended by breath. Panic urged them forward. When they stumbled into a clearing, they froze. Dozens of stone piles encircled a hollow stump. On its surface lay their own footprints, pressed freshly into the dirt. By nightfall, the forest began to speak in mimicry. Their voices echoed back, distorted, repeating fragments of their own sentences seconds after they were spoken. Flashlights dimmed simultaneously, their beams shortening until the dark swallowed everything but the trembling glow of a single lantern. The lead hiker turned toward a whisper that used their voice perfectly. Breath held. They reached out and found only cold air. Then, from the tree line, figures emerged, silhouettes shaped exactly like themselves, moving in perfect synchronization. When one stepped forward, the others followed, eyes reflecting light like wet glass. The lantern flickered, and every reflection blinked at once, the last thing seen before darkness reclaimed. The clearing was the forest's quiet satisfaction. It had learned their shapes. Morning never came. Light shifted between gray and deeper gray. Time reduced to a loop of cold breaths and trembling leaves. The hikers tried to retrace their route, yet every landmark had altered. The cairns multiplied. The stump was gone, and the trees leaned in new directions. The compass spun aimlessly, as if magnetized by something beneath the soil. Whispers echoed intermittently, not words, but intonations of despair and imitation. When one of them called out, the forest answered back perfectly, only this time, the response came from ahead instead of behind. Fear hollowed them from the inside, stripping logic from memory. As they pressed onward, branches closed behind them like a wound sealing shut. The forest had decided what would stay and what would vanish. They found a stream that wasn't there before, clear, silent, and perfectly still. Its surface reflected the forest above, but not their faces. One by one, they leaned closer, watching as shadows rippled in the water, forming human outlines that shouldn't exist. The reflections smiled, though none of them did. When a pebble dropped into the stream, the image warped violently, and something pale darted beneath the surface. The group stumbled back, one slipping into the mud. The forest responded with faint laughter, carried in the breeze. As they fled uphill, water seeped from the soil, rising faster than rainfall, clinging to their boots as though the ground refused to release them. Whatever dwelled beneath the roots had learned their scent, and it was following. Night found them again, though their watches claimed it was mid-afternoon. They built another fire, its flame dull and colorless, barely warming the air. One hiker unpacked a journal from a soaked bag, flipping through smeared pages until they found a note written in an unfamiliar hand. "We left the forest days ago." Silence followed, broken only by a rustle just beyond sight. Flashlights darted toward the sound. Nothing. Then again, closer. Breathing that wasn't theirs. Shadows lengthened, doubling each figure against the fog. For a fleeting second, every shadow moved independently, flickering with lagged motion, like poor reflections trying to keep pace. When the fire sputtered out, the shadows didn't vanish. They stepped forward. By dawn, 2 sleeping bags lay empty. The remaining hikers called out, their voices shredded by the forest's echo. No trace remained. Not footprints, not dropped gear, not scent. Only a pattern of disturbed leaves spiraled outward like a vortex. They followed it, every instinct screaming not to. The trail ended at a cluster of trees bound together by old rope, forming a crude archway. Beneath it lay their missing companions' belongings, neatly folded, dry despite the morning dew. Something about the arrangement felt deliberate, ceremonial. The forest stillness pressed against their ears until blood rang like bells. Then, from behind the archway, a voice called their names, both familiar and raw. They ran without direction, crashing through underbrush until exhaustion broke them. When they stopped, the forest had changed again. The air metallic, the trees bending inward in identical curvature, forming a tunnel of branches. At its end stood 2 figures, motionless, facing away. Their clothes matched those of the missing. One hiker whispered, pleading for an answer. Both figures turned at once, their faces smooth, featureless, pale as bark. Then the ground beneath them pulsed, and the figures sank silently into the earth as if swallowed by mud. A low hum filled the clearing, vibrating through marrow and breath. When it ceased, their footprints had merged into one. The survivors realized too late that the forest wasn't taking them, it was making them part of itself. The forest floor shifted like skin beneath their feet. Every step sank deeper, the ground breathing in slow, patient exhales. The 2 remaining hikers whispered about the others, about the faces that weren't faces, the voices repeating their own words like broken prayers. They followed a faint trail of disturbed moss that led downhill into a hollow split in the earth. A smell rose from below, iron, rot, and something older than decay. Their flashlights trembled against the walls, illuminating carved symbols spiraling downward in concentric loops. Wind whispered through the fissure, forming syllables that seemed to speak their thoughts aloud. As they descended, The air grew warmer, vibrating with a pulse that mimicked their heartbeats. It felt like entering the forest's lungs. They emerged into a cavern woven from tangled roots, the ceiling dripping with slow rivulets that hissed when they hit the ground. The air hummed, deep and resonant, like the inside of a massive throat. Shapes dangled from the roots, skeletal, fragile, wrapped in fibrous strands that pulsed faintly. Each had a faint glimmer of fabric among them. The missing hiker's clothing, now part of the living network. One survivor whispered a prayer but forgot the words halfway through. The other reached up, touching a root that seemed to twitch in response. Beneath the hum came a new sound, a heartbeat that was not their own, echoing through the cavern, sensing with their pulses until it became impossible to tell whose heart was beating anymore. They tried to climb back, but the tunnel had collapsed. Roots coiled in their path like serpents, shifting with each attempt to dig through. Whispers filled the space, soft, persuasive, telling them to rest, to listen, to join. A faint melody rose from the depths of the cavern, a lullaby distorted by echo and distance. The female hiker covered her ears, trembling, while the male pressed his ear against the soil, transfixed. His pupils dilated. He began murmuring words that weren't his own. The air thickened, dust rising as if disturbed by unseen motion. The lullaby stopped suddenly. In the silence that followed, something spoke clearly from below. One always stays. Hours or days passed without light. The male hiker stopped responding, eyes open but empty, his skin damp with condensation dripping from the roots. The female tried shaking him, pleading, but his breathing synced perfectly with the rhythmic hum of the cavern. She stumbled back, gasping, realizing he was exhaling in harmony with the sound. Then the walls began to move. But the roots pulsed, expanding and contracting, dragging soil and bone into new patterns. A narrow path opened at the far end, illuminated by faint, golden light. Gathering the last of her strength, she stepped toward it, leaving behind the echo of his voice whispering her name. Not from his mouth, but from the roots themselves. The light led her into a hollow where the earth's ceiling opened to the night sky. Moonlight spilled through, silver against the moss. For the first time in days, the air tasted clean. She fell to her knees, sobbing, until she noticed the trees encircling the opening. They were perfectly identical, their bark patterned like human veins. At their bases, roots stretched outward, merging into the same soil she'd climbed from. In the moonlight, faint shapes swayed inside the trunks, faces pressed against bark, eyes half-formed, mouths moving silently. One of them had his hair, his posture, his broken compass hanging from the root beside him. She screamed, but the forest swallowed it like breath into lungs. The echo whispered back, "Now you belong here." She wandered through the hollow until her legs trembled from exhaustion. The forest no longer resembled a landscape. It was an organism, breathing, shifting, remembering. Every gust of wind carried fragments of whispers, layered and overlapping like a chorus of lost souls rehearsing their grief. The trees trembled in rhythm to the sound, releasing spores that glittered faintly in the moonlight. Each breath she took filled her with dizziness, the air heavy with the scent of resin and decay. Then, through the silver haze, she heard her name. Not screamed, but sung. A harmony of hundreds of voices, all eerily familiar. Her steps faltered. The sound wasn't coming from the air, but from within her chest, vibrating through her bones as if she'd become part of the choir herself. She pressed her palms against her ears, but the singing persisted, echoing inside her skull. The forest seemed to pulse in rhythm with the melody, branches swaying to invisible choreography. As she stumbled forward, the ground opened into a wide basin filled with shallow water reflecting the sky. In the reflection, the moon rippled and split into dozens of fragments, each revealing the faces of those who'd vanished. Their mouths moved silently, forming words she could almost recognize. She fell to her knees beside the pool, tears mixing with the reflection until the faces began to blur. One of them lifted a finger in silence and pointed at her, then at the tree line. She turned slowly, heart pounding, as a shape emerged from the dark that looked exactly like her. Her reflection moved first, stepping across the surface of the water without sound, ripples spreading like breath. It stopped just inches away, its expression calm, almost pitying. Then it spoke, not aloud, but inside her thoughts. You were chosen to remember. She stumbled backward, shaking her head, but her double's eyes glowed faintly with the same light now pulsing beneath her own skin. The forest began to hum again, a low vibration rising into dissonant harmony. Every tree quivered, releasing waves of whispering air. Her double raised a hand, offering it gently, and when their fingers almost touched, her skin turned cold as bark. She tried to scream, but the sound that came out was music, soft, melodic, and wrong. The transformation was not sudden. It was mercifully slow, as though the forest wanted her to understand. The glow beneath her skin spread to her arms, her neck, her face, until her pulse no longer beat in rhythm with her own fear, but with the forest's song. The double smiled faintly and dissolved into spores that wrapped around her body, weaving into her clothing like threads of mist. She stumbled backward, reaching for her voice, but every breath came out as harmony. The trees leaned closer, their branches trembling with approval. The air shimmered, and within the chorus she heard words again. One voice becomes the forest. The realization struck her like a cold wind. She wasn't listening anymore. She was singing. As dawn broke, the forest was silent again. No trace of struggle, no prints in the soil. Only a faint echo that hummed through the leaves. In the clearing, a new tree had grown overnight, its bark pale and smooth as skin. From within, faint whispers lingered, fragmented songs blending with the rustle of morning wind. The birds avoided the area, circling overhead but never descending. If one listened closely, beneath the creak of branches, one could hear the faint sound of breathing. And when the sunlight filtered through the canopy just right, a silhouette could be seen within the trunk, suspended in perfect stillness. Eyes closed, mouth parted as if singing a song only the forest could hear. Weeks later, the forest remained quiet. Search teams arrived, rangers, volunteers, and journalists, each carrying radios that flickered with static the deeper they went. They found remnants, a compass still spinning, burnt fragments of clothing, and strange patterns carved into the trees like musical notes. Every time someone called out, the forest seemed to inhale, silencing the birds. At the edge of the hollow, one ranger froze, reporting what sounded like a woman's voice humming faintly beneath the soil. The hum pulsed through the ground, synchronized with the wind, turning branches into trembling instruments. He stepped closer, listening. The sound grew softer, intimate, like a heartbeat whispered into his ear. When he turned away, he realized the trees had shifted behind him, closing in ever so slightly. Back at the ranger station, the footage recovered from the hiker's camera looped endlessly. Fragments of fog, trembling voices, the sound of something like wind carrying whispers that matched no known language. The station lights flickered each time the footage reached the final frame, a still image of trees bending inward around a faint glow. The ranger reviewed it again, slowing it frame by frame. In one brief instant between cuts of static, the figure of a woman appeared within the glow. Eyes closed, lips slightly parted, as though singing. Then, the monitor went black. The generator outside stuttered, and from the tree line came a single distant note. Long, sustained, almost human, vibrating through the glass until every bulb in the room shattered. Days blurred into sleepless nights as reports spread. Locals claimed to hear low songs drifting from the forest at sunset, the sound following them even indoors. The ranger tried recording the tones, but the playback produced only silence followed by faint breathing. He returned once more to the forest edge, where he discovered fresh tracks leading inward, barefoot, human-sized, and recent. The ground vibrated faintly beneath his boots, the hum rising from the soil like a warning or invitation. When he pressed his palm to a nearby trunk, he felt warmth pulsing just beneath the bark. Then a whisper brushed his ear. "You found the path. Walk it." He turned sharply, but no one stood there, only the echo of his own breath repeating from behind the trees. He entered at dawn, radio silent, recorder running. The deeper he walked, the stronger the vibration beneath his feet. It felt less like sound, more like a heartbeat, steady, encompassing. The forest seemed brighter than before, leaves shimmering as though wet with dew, though the air remained dry. He passed a tree whose bark bore a faint outline of a human hand. As sunlight moved across it, the shape appeared to twitch. Voices joined the hum, soft, layered harmonies rising from every direction. He stopped when he reached a clearing where the soil curved inward like a basin. At its center stood the pale tree, glowing faintly in morning light. From within, the hum grew into melody. Every note resonated with his pulse. He stepped closer until his shadow merged with the tree's outline. The melody softened, now more a breath than a sound. The bark beneath his fingertips felt warm. "Alive," he whispered into it, asking what it wanted. The answer came not as words, but a vibration that passed through his hand into his spine. His vision blurred. Light fractured into 1,000 thin beams. For a moment, he saw faces moving behind the bark. The hikers, the woman, all still. All singing in silence. Then, slowly, his reflection appeared among them. His hand sank slightly into the surface as if touching water. The hum deepened, steady, eternal. The forest had found another voice for its choir. Outside, the wind carried a single note that lingered long after the silence returned. The town at the forest's edge began to change. First came the sounds, barely audible, carried on dawn winds. A low hum that seemed to drift from no specific direction, yet vibrated through walls and bones alike. Radios picked it up even when unplugged, a steady tone that never faded. Locals claimed to dream of trees moving under moonlight, of faces blooming from bark like pale flowers. One elderly resident swore she saw the missing ranger walking the edge of the woods at dusk, his mouth moving, no sound escaping. Others dismissed it as grief, or folklore returning to life. But every night, the hum grew louder, matching the rhythm of breathing, steady, patient, waiting for someone to answer. By midweek, animals began vanishing. Dogs refused to approach the tree line, their ears pressed flat, growling at something unseen. A local photographer wandered near the forest's edge to capture the mist. His camera malfunctioned. Every image came back identical. Pale light, distorted trees, and faint outlines of figures in the fog, no matter where he aimed. When he tried again, the camera emitted a high, trembling frequency before shutting off completely. That night, the hum echoed from the hills, soft at first, then rising until windows quivered. The photographer awoke to the sound of footsteps on gravel outside his door. He called out but heard only the wind, and beneath it, the sound of his own voice repeating from the trees. The hum transformed into melody. Children began humming it unconsciously at school, unable to explain where they'd heard it. In the church, the organ produced the same tune without anyone touching the keys. The pastor locked the building, claiming the air vibrated with breath when no one was inside. The townsfolk gathered at night to discuss leaving, but even the roads seemed changed, curving toward the forest regardless of direction. Headlights flickered when aimed at the trees, and shadows bent inward, longer than light should allow. One family tried to flee before dawn. Their car was found empty, parked at the forest's entrance, engine still warm. Inside, the radio played the hum on endless repeat. The authorities arrived. Scientists, journalists, even priests. Instruments failed near the tree line. Compasses spun, and recording devices played back distorted heartbeats instead of sound. The priests attempted a blessing, but their words faltered, lost in the rising vibration that pulsed from the soil. When night fell, the forest glowed faintly, each tree shimmering with subtle luminescence. Through binoculars, someone swore they saw faces beneath the bark. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all turned toward the town. The priests fled before dawn. The scientists stayed, taking samples. Only 2 returned. They spoke little, except to say that when they cut into the bark, it bled. Not sap, but something warm. Something that breathed. By month's end, the forest had expanded nearly half a mile. Houses at the edge stood half consumed by roots, crawling through their foundations. The hum never ceased now. It blended with every sound, hiding in running water, whispering through ventilation, even threading itself into human speech. When the last power line failed, the town fell into silence. But silence no longer meant absence of sound. It was the deep, living breath of the forest itself. Somewhere within that dark expanse, faint figures could be seen walking between the trees. Familiar silhouettes, moving without hurry, their mouths open in song. At night, the wind carried the tune farther than before. It was no longer the forest's song. It was the world's. By late autumn, maps of the region no longer matched reality. Survey drones lost signal above the valley, their feeds collapsing into static woven with faint harmonic tones. From a distance, the forest appeared frozen in perpetual dusk, its canopy shimmering with subdued light. Travelers who stopped at the last service station reported feeling pressure in their ears, as if standing beside an immense speaker, transmitting nothing but heartbeat. The government sealed the area, fencing the highway and posting warning signs that hummed faintly when touched. At night, even miles away, a low chord lingered in the air, a sound that was not quite music, not quite memory. Months passed. Satellite photographs showed the forest expanding in slow spirals, its colors shifting with the seasons yet untouched by weather. From orbit, it resembled a fingerprint etched into the continent. Analysts argued over causes: fungal mutation, magnetic anomaly, mass hysteria. But recordings taken near the border always ended the same way: a quiet intake of breath, then a single sustained note fading into silence. Reporters whispered that the hum could still be heard inside the capital on windless nights. People began leaving offerings at forest shrines, as if the phenomenon were divine, not ecological. The boundary became a pilgrimage site, though no one who stepped beyond the trees was seen again. Winter arrived early. Snow fell soundlessly, settling upon the treetops without melting. The hum dulled, replaced by faint vibrations felt more in the chest than heard by the ear. Scientists returned to record readings. Their instruments registered perfect zero. No magnetic field, no temperature fluctuation, only stillness. Yet their own heartbeats sensed unnaturally, as if guided by an unseen rhythm. One researcher removed her gloves, touching the frozen bark. Beneath the frost, she felt warmth, a pulse like the slow tide of breath. She closed her eyes and smiled faintly, whispering that the forest was dreaming. When she opened them again, her colleagues stood motionless, snow gathering on their shoulders, listening to something only she could hear. Spring thaw revealed nothing of the town that once bordered the valley, only a field of young trees swaying in symmetrical rows, their trunks smooth and pale. Birds returned but refused to sing, wings beating in muted rhythm. Travelers who lingered claimed they could hear words within the breeze, each gust forming a syllable of a song too vast to finish. Legends spread that the forest would stop growing once the song was complete, or perhaps once everything had learned it. No one knew which would come first. On clear nights, the moonlight turned the valley silver. And far below, the canopy breathed in unison. An endless choir sleeping beneath the roots of the world. Years later, travelers still speak of the place. They call it the Singing Forest, though it no longer makes sound. When wind crosses the valley, radio static bends into quiet harmony for exactly 1 minute, then fades. Scholars argue whether it's residual frequency or collective imagination, but those who stand at the border claim to feel warmth through the soles of their boots, a rhythm pulsing faintly beneath the earth. Steady, human, alive. They listen, waiting for the song to begin again, though none ever hear it twice. And somewhere far below, beneath soil and stone, the forest waits, its choir of roots whispering in dreams, keeping time for the world above until silence learns to sing.